Hello, everyone. Glad you're joining us today. My name is Dan McGrew, and welcome to iT2's DX Talks. We're excited today to have Ken Rundus, a longtime friend, with us today. Hello, Ken.
Hi, good to be here with you, Dan. Thank you so much.
Good to see you. It's sort of funny that you and I think the first time I met you was the late 80s out at Frito-Lay, that we've done business all these years. And
that's true.
And it's crazy how time flies, isn't it?
It really is. If that's not transformation, I don't know what is.
I remember the first time that you had a project for me to work on. It was an IMS DBDC programmer analyst, if I recall correctly.
There you go. Yep. And the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
That's exactly right. So, folks, what we're doing today is we're talking to Ken, who has certainly had a long storied career. And if you would, Ken, just for the audience, give us a little background, a little history on you and what your expertise is, please.
You bet. Thank you, Dan. I have had a career in technology, been blessed to do a lot of different things, and done that in big companies from Exxon, PepsiCo, Southwest Airlines, Mohawk Industries, and with a lot of different technologies. So it's been fun to see over the years from the very beginning to today. It's still all ones and zeros. So that's why I say the more it stays the same. But there have been a lot of change. And with it, some is true transformational and some is more just more change. So I'm excited to be able to have some perspective on having done this for a long time, as Dan has, to see some things that have stayed the same and some things that are truly different that with real transformation you have to be careful about.
That's exactly right. And as you know, Ken, we specialize in SAP and have been doing that since the mid 90s. And so we see from our perspective, customers that come to us that are big, small, anywhere in between, that go through the process of having to, it starts out with digital transformation. What does that mean? And in today's world, there's companies that are still running ECC and it's on-prem and they're scared to death to go to the cloud, and some, do the private cloud versus the public cloud.
Yeah.
But really, really and truly, I think, Ken, the thing that's without question true for all companies is that if they're going to go through digital transformation, there's a lot of things that take place. So why don't you give us an idea of, I know you've been through it multiple times, so give us a little bit of an idea of what the good, the bad, the ugly is, if you would.
You bet. No, I'm glad to do that. And I'd like to start with, not everything is transformation. So I think you have to begin in your journey understanding, is this truly changing form or structure, and to what degree and at what level? So I think, like in many things in technology, sometimes we don't stop to think about a good definition of what we're really doing and why. And so I think it's important first to start with your why the organization needs it, and what is really changing and at what level, so that you have the right people in place and you've got the right stakeholders that are signing off on it before you ever start. So I like to say start with your why and then understand what you're doing before you get too far down the road. And then for me, it's always been about people first. So the more that technology gets complicated and the diverse, it's still all about people having the right expertise and the right people, both from who's impacted in the organization, as well as who has the expertise that you shouldn't be trying to do this on your own. It's been done somewhere already. So there are not many things that haven't already been done by somebody somewhere. And starting with those experts that people like, Dan have helped me with over the years, have the experts that I need so that I don't have to go do this on my own. And I don't have to be a bleeding edge. I can actually learn from somebody else's experience. So that's where I would start, Dan. It was just making sure you know your why and the who, the people that have done that before that can help you, and people in the organization that are going to be impacted that are stakeholders you need to have on board.
It's interesting you say that, because what we run into a lot of times is that there is an issue with the people internally,
Yep.
and ultimately the adoption of whatever's chosen. And you know as good as anybody that really, getting people to do things differently from the way they've done it in the past
Yep.
can really put a real hindrance on the success of the project, no matter what the technology is. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it goes back to Peter Drucker's definition of a leader is getting people to do something they don't want to do and doing it anyway, right? And hopefully by the end, like doing it. And so that is where I like to say it's true leadership. Managing change is, I think, a little bit of an oxymoron. I think leading change is more appropriate, especially when we're talking about digital transformation or things of this nature, that you're actually changing form or structure of something that's very impactful on an organization. It needs a lot of leadership.
It's so true. We had a customer in the past couple of years that had made a major decision with technology with SAP, and was going to spend a lot of money, and
Yep.
they struggled to get adoption with the user community and the people that, even some of the managers that were involved, they had a difficult time getting people to embrace it. And I was talking to the C-level executive that was a sponsor of it, and I said, "So what did you do?" And he said, "Well, for the first couple of years, it was extremely painful. I was being questioned. The board questioned me. I got questions all over the place of why we did this." And he said, deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do, but I just had a hard time getting people to embrace it. So he said, after a couple of years, I went in and I finally told them, I said, "This is no longer a democracy. This is what we're going to do."
Yep.
And since that time, efficiencies come out of it. They've actually put money to the bottom line in their world. Have you ever seen anything like that? Does that sound like a story you've heard of?
Oh, it's pretty typical. And I think if you look at just people in general, every study, every assessment I've ever seen, Dan, is that majority of people are followers and most people are risk averse. So most people are waiting for somebody to tell them what to do and why they need to do it and what's in it for them that says they should be on board or they should be helping. And of course, as you just mentioned, starting at the top, if you don't have the senior executives on board with what the change is and why it's happening, you might as well just shut it down. So you got to start there. And most people already know that. But then getting everybody else on board is a lot of leadership, a lot of selling, a lot of explaining to people over and over again. It's the 3 whys and the 7 whys, and people need to keep hearing, why are we doing this? Why it's good for me? Why it's good for my career? Why it's good for the organization? And that is just a lot of leadership.
I couldn't agree more. Also, we've run into and seen in multiple environments to where the management will make the decision that they want to sort of try. I want to put my foot in the water a little bit with this new approach that it's going to impact the entire organization, and do it more of a silo. And I found that's not a very effective approach, because if you do, all right, and it goes wrong, and that's one individual, then it can derail the entire effort. You seen that before?
I have. So it had a big project like that was in an international company, and the idea was, if we build it, they will come, and didn't have the leadership of the organization that was most impacted, that trial was a failure because it didn't have the right people involved from the get-go. So I kind of think it's mostly the getting the who's involved, and the right who's are very critical. And to your point, also at enough scale that people will buy it as a true impact on the organization. That's a trial is not a trial unless it has critical mass, I think. So you have to make sure that happens.
I think probably the biggest thing that I've witnessed firsthand in change management as a whole is that people don't socialize or the leadership doesn't socialize the plan as often as they should, because in the development process, the implementation process, it goes in stages. And so much of the time, people are left out that they think aren't critical to this because they're not involved in the direct effort. That I think leads a lot to the lack of adoption when it comes to, going through one of the, I think it was a McKinsey or one of them, one of the studies, they talked about it as well. I wish I'd have read it prior to, because I could have advised my customer a little better. But
yeah, there's a lot of good writing out there, and I think you're right. McKinsey, Harvard both have a lot on leading change, and it's not a new thing anymore. So to your point, there's a lot of material out there, a lot of studies, a lot of case studies. But the Project Management Institute publishes every year. Number one cause for failure in projects is still that same thing. So we keep wanting to repeat the same mistakes for some reason.
And it's just, it's the human element. I always talk about when I'm asked, which technology, what should we do or whatever, I'm like, well, I need to understand the nature and the demographic of your organization and who's making the decisions. Because if the technology by itself isn't going to solve every problem. As a matter of fact, it can create more than it solves if the people aren't in sync. And so we end up finding out that we get brought in on projects many times that are not because they're going to the cloud or they're doing a migration. It's because of problems that they've had that they're trying to now solve for that weren't managed correctly in the first place.
Well, that's true. And, I think, Dan, still technology is somewhat of a blind spot still for a lot of CEOs. And I like to compare it to leverage, like debt. Debt can be good or bad. It's leverage. Technology is the same way. But unless you're leveraging it against the right process and the right things in the organization and in a right way, it's going to be either good or bad. So I think that's probably one of the key aspects that can't be overemphasized as you're bringing up, that continuing to tell people what that is and how that impacts is important at all levels in the organization.
What is your opinion, Ken? What are the benefits, in your opinion? You take an organization, because you've gone through transformation in your career, just like I've had to go through in technology, just in different worlds. But you've gone through it, and you've gone through it again, and you've gone through it again. It's just the road goes on forever, right? So, what is your advice to someone looking for what are the benefits? What are the benefits that I'm going to get from going through the transformation process to improve my technical ecosystem and the technology as a whole? What would you say are some of the best benefits of that are when you get it done?
Well, I think depending on the business, a couple examples. One of the latest ones was at Daltile and at Michael's that I saw in digital transformations, and those were right before COVID, which saved the companies in a lot of cases because it enabled a lot of processes that couldn't have been done before. So I think a lot of it is staying relevant in the marketplace with your customers and then individuals. I think technology professionals, as well as in every employee, wants to continue to stay relevant in a company that's growing, thriving, and continue to offer better service to their customers. So I think it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the company. It's a win for the employee and the customer all together, that really becomes something that everybody benefits from. It just doesn't happen on its own. It has to be intentional. And that's why I say it's a lot about leadership, making sure that each of those groups are represented well as you're going through the change.
I agree. What do you think? What do you think about the companies that they've got to make a change, like in SAP today? Okay,
Yep.
Like we have today, the organizations that are still on ECC. Okay,
Right.
They're going to have to make a change, and I think the year is 27, and I'm not sure of the exact month, but at some point there's not going to be the support according to SAP.
Right.
Because we understand why SAP wants to.
It'll happen eventually. It has to. Yeah.
That's right. So, because we have several customers today that say we want no part of the cloud, right? Well, they're going to have to go through. That's a great example, I think, of some of these organizations that are going to have to go through this process of, change management and making the decision to transform the organization. What kind of advice would you have for those folks?
I would say it is now, I think, a non-negotiable that cloud is here, and it's here to stay. You have to be there to stay relevant from a cost perspective and competitive. So I think it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it's like many things that have happened in history from a technology change. It always looks scary at the beginning. There's the early adopters, there's the mainstream, and then there's the people kicking and screaming at the end, right? So by now, you should be at that mainstream. If you're not doing cloud, you better be getting started with it, or you're going to be left with a non-competitive company.
And I think that's it's really hard
It
for
is.
for a leader to hear that, because what's the typical case? The person in charge is leaning on his group of lieutenants and folks like that, and sometimes we find
Yeah.
that there's not an agreement in the ranks of the lieutenants, and so you've said it multiple times in this call. It's about leadership, okay?
Yeah.
And I agree with you, of course. It is about leadership. We see that because we see things objectively because we're
Yeah.
brought into so many different size companies and types of companies and what they do and what their industry is. But that's the one constant. You have many organizations that everyone's in sync, and you have many organizations that there's several lieutenants that don't support something or whatever, that just derails it and puts it back and so forth. So what would be your best advice, Ken, because you've got so much experience in not only this area, but across the board as an executive? What would be your advice to any organization out there that, just use the example that I gave, that, we're sitting where we are today in ECC and we don't want to move. Okay. You said it's imminent, but do you have any advice about anything that a C-level executive that might be watching this that you could pass along, or to any lieutenant or anyone of that matter?
Sure. Yeah, I would start with the C-level executives. I'm glad to help anybody connect with somebody that's already done it. And I think that's like most things. If you talk to more people that have already been there, you start gaining confidence that this isn't as scary as I think it is. You also come with more ammunition to sell to your organization internally. People that are doubters or that aren't sure that it's going to work, you have more tangible expertise that you can offer from other companies that have done it, as well as I think what works a lot of times, Dan, is finding some company that's in a similar industry that's been down this journey, and then align levels in the organization. Have your CIO talk to the CIO, have the CEO talk to the CEO, and on down the organization. And most companies are very willing to do that. And there's nothing like more information to help you reduce your risk and fear of what's ahead and what's possible. It becomes a lot more realistic. And my favorite is Roger Bannister, right? Once he ran the 4-minute mile, the next year, everybody was doing it. But before then, people thought their heart was going to explode, so nobody did it. All it takes is one. But you talk to that one, all of a sudden it's a lot less scary.
It's great advice. Do you know any companies, Ken, in your career that were at the beginning of making a move to newer technology? The new tech, just like you said, there's early adopters and so forth. But do you know any executive that was at the beginning of making a change, and then 5 years later, with all the involvement of technology, that they regretted the decision and it was just there's been failures, of course, with implementations, but really my question is, the technology keeps advancing, okay, and it keeps getting better and better and better and making life a lot easier and more efficient, et cetera. Do you know anyone that regrets that they moved forward with digital transformation and whatever software, whatever it was they were doing?
With digital transformation, I can't think of one that is current that was a regret. Now, you'll have many that will say, I need to keep going because I didn't get there yet. Most of the time, that's the case. So once they start, they realize there's much more there than they thought, because now they know more. And it's like a PhD professor I had in one class. He says, I hope by the end of this class, you know more than when you started the class, because it truly is, the more you learn, the less you know. And it's that true with digital transformation, any transformational journey. You start in the journey, you know a lot more as you get into it, or you learn a lot more and you know a lot less. So this exponentially grows your motivation to keep going. I think it's more the opposite, Dan. It's not people that say it was a failure. People say that I need to go farther, faster now than I thought I was possible or thought I needed to, now that I've gotten into it.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I asked the question because, you know, in what we do, the people that we do business with, I don't run into people that say, you know, I regret that we made the step to this newer technology. And I think it's going to be the same thing, you know, with the folks that I use the example that they're on ECC today and they need to get to the cloud, need to get to the public cloud or private cloud, but they need to get there. And as you said so much, you know, earlier, competitiveness and good for your company and et cetera. So that's fantastic stuff. Any other thoughts that you have, Ken, about this topic before we finish?
Well, I am also a big fan of being in community. So I say join support groups, join user groups, be part of your CEO, get in a CEO group, understand what other people are doing, and don't do it alone. It's just a lot more fun and a lot more profitable if you're doing it with other people. So community is powerful. Find your community and get plugged in.
That's awesome, Ken. Well, I hope that a lot of people are able to listen to you because you have just so much wisdom and so much experience that's beneficial because you've been there, you've done it, not just once, but quite a few times. So, Ken, thank you very much for joining us. Again, this is Dan McGrew and Ken Rundus. Thank you for joining us on the iT2 DX Talks, and we'll be back with you soon. Thank you very much, Ken. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure.